So what we're here today to talk about is, in this world of let's lift and shift everything to Azure, or whatever the current CIO checklist of things that they'd like to have happen very quickly, we're going to talk about those things that are somewhat difficult to achieve that with for a variety of reasons. So as hybrid clouds become more likely, we're going to deal with some of the more complicated support issues that arise from that. So broadly speaking, the definition of the problem is essentially if you are concerned about running your workloads in the right place rather than some lock, stock and barrel lift and shift, you will have advantages. However, distributing your workloads across different platforms, whether that be SaaS provision, appliances, just VMs in a public cloud, your on-prem estate, also your data center estate, you're going to have some challenges about resolution, particularly if there's ETL and stuff between them. And of course, there's always that hard nut, that thing that is now getting old, that can't be patched properly. Has got a little red flashing light in the corner, costs a fortune in break fix, etc., which we'll also talk about. And don't know why that's done that, but anyway. And then we've got some use cases to talk about, and I would encourage us to be a little bit interactive. It's a very small group, sadly. So if people have got burning questions, let's deal with them on the fly, make it a little bit more interactive. So we're going to be talking about a partnership between RDB Concepts with full stack service provider, DataVita, which is an extremely capable infrastructure provider in Scotland. And to help me do that, I've got Ray here from DataVita.
Hi guys. Essentially, when we actually take on and have a look at clients, we kind of focus on workloads for us. So essentially, we kind of break this down into a kind of cycle with our customers. So essentially, we kind of look at the requirements for those customers. So when I'm referring to the requirements, I'm looking at the applications or what your actual services you're trying to provide for your customers to your clients or your internal clients as such. So for instance, are we talking about LAMP stacks? Are we talking about blobs of data? Are we talking about analytical data or some kind of transactional database? So we kind of look at that and ask what those requirements are from you, because sometimes these have various different kinds of kind of standards that it requires, for example. So like for instance, if we have a look at databases, for instance, there might be a case of I/O performance or blob data. There might be quite a lot of data there that needs to be kind of looked at. So we kind of have ask those questions. Clearly, that one of the burning questions that we do have to ask is obviously about the cost and budget for that as well, because obviously everybody has to come with a budget. So we need to try and see what your requirements for that is. You might be wanting to move everything to cloud, as some of the speakers were talking about the first cloud moving into Azure or GCP as public cloud. But when it comes to some of these big, heavy analytical databases and maybe some of the number crunching side of things and pushing stuff into Sage to get that kind of machine learning aspect of it, it might be quite costly to you. So obviously we need to kind of make sure that it fits within the cost and the budget that you guys are requiring. We also look at the kind of security and the compliance side of things. So what I'm meaning by that is some of the stuff requires data sovereignty, so where it's actually sitting and residing within the UK or if it's in the US, and obviously there's GDPR, there's Privacy Shield, all that lovely good stuff that you've got to kind of keep in compliance with as well. We also kind of have a look at and make sure that we do backups and ransomware and all that lovely good stuff. And then we kind of move on to how it's managed from there. So this could be managed by us, as we have several SMEs within some of the fields of public cloud, our own private clouds, and some of the box shifting and tin that we do have from there as well. So how we kind of break this down into the services aspect of these requirements. We kind of have 4 pillars here. So the DataVita, the kind of data center, the cloud, the protect, and obviously the connect aspect of this as well. So Say, for instance, you have some legacy systems, and you've sweated the assets for, I don't know, maybe 7 years or whatever. It's just something that you can't move or can't remove and push into virtualization or even into public cloud. You need that kind of data center footprint, or even if you want that data center footprint to, we have the facilities available to that. So we have the kind of tier 3 certification with our data center. Sometimes some of your workloads that you might have for co-location might require a lot of power and compute. So we have that kind of facility available for us there as well. We kind of move on to cloud. So say, for instance, you have a cloud strategy and you're looking to kind of move into that cloud environment. There might be a case of that you want to kind of dip your foot into the kind of cloud aspect of that. We could have a look at moving into it as an infrastructure as a service product. Or alternatively, we can have a hybrid where we move into our private cloud, our public cloud, our public cloud. But we can have a connection between our public cloud and AWS, GCP, and all that lovely good stuff. We move on to protect. So this is this is a security aspect of this as well. So when referring to kind of the protect side of the business, it's about disaster recovery as a service. Are you looking to have that kind of footprint within our data center, or even if you have it on-prem, but have it bounce off onto one of our data centers? We have the facilities and the capability of being able to do that as well. When it comes to like ransomware and things like that, as you're well aware, things are kicking off in the East at the moment. Heightened cybersecurity is certainly well up there at the moment. We've had certainly an uptick in customers asking about ransomware, their cybersecurity posture, and things like that. So we kind of help them look at that aspect of the business as well. And when it comes to backups, we look at the ransomware protection aspect of that as well. So trying to make backups immutable for them, trying to harden those systems, and ensuring that there is sufficient protection for those systems. And if we come back to the legacy aspect of that and how do you protect those kinds of services, we can protect them with kind of an XDR and EDR solution that will help enable you to keep using those systems, but have the kind of warm, fuzzy feeling at the back of it that allows you to ensure that it's protected as well. And then last but not least, we talk about the connect aspect of the business as well. So say, for instance, you have several remote sites. We can provide an SD-WAN or SASE kind of solution to go along with that, which will allow your remote sites to connect to our data center if you want to centralize everything, or if you're looking to kind of have workloads in various different places, we can provide a solution that will be able to do that for you. Along with that, there is availability of Cloud Connect, IP transit, and at least point to points. The Cloud Connect aspect of it, we kind of we have a solution which will allow us to connect from our data center in Glasgow to AWS, Azure, and GCP. And to give you kind of real life figures on that one, when it comes to connecting from Glasgow to London, the latency is quite low. It's roughly about 12 to 15 milliseconds between our data center and availability zone 2. So to give you an idea of those figures. But overall, really, there's always this bugging question which is around about the Oracle aspect of it. Because it's heavy loads, heavy I/O, licensing is an absolute nightmare. I will pass on to Richard, who will be able to give you a little bit more information on that.
Cool. There you go. So in this new world, which is being very ably supported by data centers such as DataVita that are putting themselves in the center of the hybrid environment, we've got quite a few complexities. So everybody had one of these, probably still got them. Depends who you are, of course. Data infrastructure renewal has been more frequent in private sector generally than elsewhere, but not exclusively. But everybody's got this normal stuff that we all understood. You had a database, you had some DBAs possibly, sysadmins, stuff came in and out. It was normal stuff. And then Of course, it made sense that, maybe this is a retailer, they've got a POS system. Of course, nobody wants to run a POS in a data center anymore, although plenty of people do, actually. So, we'll go and we'll buy a SaaS solution for that. It's easy, there's an API, it spits out some stuff, it goes into the core app, life is good. And then, of course, somebody says, yeah, but we really should have a data warehouse. So, and obviously, data warehouses, we're not going to put that in the basement or in the data center, we'll just have one in a public cloud, why not? So we build a data warehouse. It's a traditional database, actually, but it's a VM, it's in the cloud. Some more skills to learn. We've had to learn REST APIs. Now we're going to learn about AWS or Azure, and none of these things are even vaguely similar. So there's quite a lot to learn. That skills matrix is growing. Then maybe we'll do some serverless appliance BI workloads. That's because everyone says you'd have those. So we'll have those as well. And those don't even have a server, so we've got to talk to them in another way. Maybe they get orchestrated into existence when they're needed and then disappear again. Who knows? And then, of course, HR says, "Oh, SaaS is great. We don't want to do this PeopleSoft thing anymore. We'll do this. We'll do instead. We'll go and have another SaaS." So the new stuff has got actually quite a lot of new things in it. Your in-house team has now got an expanding set of skills to deal with, and it didn't necessarily get rid of any of the others. So even if you're in a transformation that's going out quite a while, there's a big interim stage where it's all a bit all over the place. And of course, most people have accidentally ended up halfway between these things anyway, because the SaaS argument has been quite compelling in some sectors. So this has already come about. And in this situation, you have quite a complex support scenario. You might have really complicated ETLs that are going from APIs to various different targets. You've still got to create your authoritative data repository, but you also need to know whether these transactions are actually completing. So if there is a flow of data through APIs to various core applications and ultimately to a BI thing, which is perhaps dealing with decision support at quite a high level, you need to know whether they're completing. You need to know what happens if part of that process fails, etc. And because it's a little bit of a nightmare to deal with all those different technologies and different suppliers and different vendors, you don't really have the ability to make a single phone call to get a resolution to a problem. So as all the various updates to SaaSes, you often don't even get a say in whether a SaaS is updated or not. It will just happen, and they'll say that it's neutral to you, but is it? So this support scenario is actually quite complicated. That's what we do, actually. We do cross-platform, full-stack support, and which is why we're here talking about it. So yeah, it's a complicated problem. When you get to actually do these transformations, it's all about keeping the lights on, keeping stability while the change is going on. And honestly, most, even big organizations, don't have all the skills in place to actually do that without some help. So there is a migration issue as well as a support issue, because going from A to B is not straightforward. So that's the backdrop to looking at these problem workloads, because there's always something that doesn't fit the model that you would like it to fit. And there are also some opportunities. Here's some examples of things that become difficult to deal with. So legacy operating systems, out of patch, can't patch them anymore. You can run them, but you're putting them into a cloud environment. Maybe it's Solaris that you've got an issue with, so you're stuck at a version level. Maybe your apps can't be upgraded. The whole application stack might be end of life. We're dealing with people using old versions of PHP which can't be patched. How do you deal with that? You've got a complicated architecture. Why have you got it? Well, because maybe it's old and it relied on tin. So you didn't have the ability to create 10 VMs that were movable even within your sort of on-prem estate. It's actually running on metal. There's quite a lot of things still running on metal. Licensing issues. Maybe it's running on metal because your core license vendors didn't and still won't let you run it on certain virtualizations. You're quite limited with Oracle licenses, for example, as to how you can run them virtualized, because you can't put it on VMware. You'll smile as you pay. And then, of course, you've got, as I mentioned before, in a problematic hybrid environment, you've got this complexity to deal with, workflows and ETL. So we've dealt with these problems essentially by putting in place things that can deal with that. So what do we have? You need a good support partner, which of course is why I'm talking to you. We are a great support partner, and we have great partners to help in that whole endeavor. But essentially, you need to be able to support the full stack and do a resolving service regardless of where it fits in and with a single point of contact. It's a really important point, because without that, you really are in a situation where you've got a lot of different things to deal with, and it's very complicated. Okay, so let's have a look at a first use case. I'm going to deal with some of the solutions by looking at actual examples. So in this instance, it's we actually have a set of these, principally building societies. They have a particular vendor that provides core applications to them. The vendor would like them to come into a walled garden where they're already being abused, in my opinion, but in that walled garden, the opportunity for further abuse is almost unlimited without moving away. So moving to an Azure tenancy lock, stock and barrel was not an option to get a supported application from this vendor because it was against their policy. However, what we were able to do was to provide them with a compliant cloud infrastructure that was managed by us. So we have a couple of versions of this. One is that's available multi-tenanted, another one we set up for individual customers, but they're all the same. And essentially we use a hard partitionable hypervisor, which is OLVM based on KVM, and that enables us to stay compliant both with Oracle licensing and indeed other licensing that's core based without incurring the wrath of either the vendor or Oracle. And actually you can save money into the bargain. I'll explain that in a minute. They also had some API issues to do with their mobile app vendor and an integration into the same vendor's core application, which we're able to fix. So we're looking again, it is already becoming hybridized. So it was on-prem, it's going to go to a cloud, but a particular cloud. It has to interoperate with the rest of their Azure estate, and they've got a SaaS provided by a third-party mobile application vendor that's branded for them, but it's ran as a SaaS that needs to integrate in. So we immediately get straight into that whole hybridized environment just by doing this one thing, having a corporate policy that moves all the easy stuff to Azure, and then suddenly the core app goes, can't go, right? So we managed to do that now with a number of building societies, all with the same vendor, and we've actually got a way of operating now without too much histrionics. But essentially the bonus here is that the Oracle licensing pays for any of the cost because you can reduce it. So what happens is this. In the old days, you had an environment for production, environment for development, UAT, and DR. Each one of those environments licensed, including headroom, for Oracle licenses. So let's say you had 8 production licenses, 8 in DR, and say 4 for your UAT environment. Because they're all discrete pieces of equipment, they all have to have that spare capacity built into them. But when you go to a high availability cloud environment, you don't have to do that anymore. If you are on our cloud, we can actually pool the CPUs that you're going to actually pay for from Oracle and make them available to multiple VMs, okay? So all that spare capacity that was in the discrete environments, you now don't need, because you can actually say, well, all of those environments were only on average 30% utilized. So we'll, instead of having 20, we'll put UAT, dev, and production all together. We'll give them 8. We'll give production 80% priority. And then all the VMs that are related to those platforms can just use that pool of resources. You can't do that in a public cloud, because in a public cloud, you're back to the same scenario where every vCPU you buy has to be licensed, regardless of whether you use it. So if you've got a 25% utilized 8 CPU machine, you're buying eight cores of Oracle to run it with, and that's quite expensive. So the ability to move them into a cloud environment, very similar to the DataVita one, right next door to Azure, so there's Fabric to get you straight onto the public cloud, but having it in this nice multi-tenanted Oracle-friendly cloud environment means you stay in with the vendor. It's no longer a problematic environment. It doesn't create any license issues with Oracle. In fact, it gives you the opposite. It gives you the opportunity to optimize your Oracle footprint. You might save 8 cores of Oracle in this kind of situation and get a performance boost because individual environments actually have access to more Oracle compute individually than they did before. And in the case of these small banks, they actually have periodic reports that consume an entire environment for 24 hours for a compliance report or something like this. Very, very useful. So yeah, a great story. There we go. Use case 2. If anyone's got questions, by the way, about this licensing or the environments, just chip in. I mean, we can be interactive in this group, definitely. So this one's slightly different. Actually not an Oracle story, but it could be. In this instance, it's an ancient hardware-based implementation of a complex website. And the problem here was essentially patch levels and operating system versions were historic. So there was no security patching available. We're talking 2 versions ago, end of life stuff. So what we had to do here was to, first of all, remove the architectural dependence on metal. So when you're building things like this out of metal, you end up with a totally different architecture than you would if you were, say, building it out of appliances, for instance. I mean, a website can look horrible when you've got tin involved in it all over the place. The other problem was that to make any advances, to look at containerization or to look at just current security requirements, we had to use pretty expert sysadmin skills to actually compile backports of security patches for older versions of things like PHP, things like the ancillary services that were out of support. Once we were able to do that, we then looked at raising the operating system level, which we were able to do. Again, we were recompiling stuff, making custom patching, which can be systematized going forward. So it's a difficult problem at the beginning, but once you've put in place the process that you want to use, it gets easier. And then streamline the whole of the infrastructure to take advantage of high availability computing rather than individual lumps of metal.
Question on that.
Yeah, sure.
About this architecture. I mean, most websites, the legacy websites, are running on a multi-tier, presentation layer, application layer,
Yep.
database. So you're talking about high availability database, which, my company, we have multiple SaaS products.
Yep.
They're on that multi-tier MVC kind of architecture. Common things, where are the bottlenecks going to lie? It's going to be the database.
Yep.
Is it
Yes.
the application layer? It could be an application layer. So
Yep.
how do you bring, I guess, a cluster approach? Do you have things like HTTP session replication, or if the application server layer goes down, how do you tackle it?
Right. Okay. That's a little bit too deep for me, but in principle, what we had here was because it was on metal, you had bigger servers because there was no virtualization in place. So what that meant is that each of the bigger servers was actually running many services. And let's say this is like a 15-year-old architecture for this. So in the new environment, you actually end up with a lot more smaller servers So they're like offering microservices. Some of them will be, just load balanced application server level. Some will be doing shibboleth type things and sign on and all the rest of it. But there's also a load of Couchbase and other cache type activities which all got separated out. So that's the way we streamline that. And of course, as you might want things to scale, to come into existence. Precisely that, yeah. So you break out the services, you make them all individualized. I mean, later on.
You load balance with that. So I mean, I'm ex-Oracle, I'll be clear. But I'm consulting, I head of consulting teams, not database on e-commerce. But with no vested interest. But obviously, Oracle databases per se are very highly available. I've worked with, I used to have lead architects at Sainsbury's Online, over 200 million orders a year.
Yeah.
No problem handling that. But where there's often bottlenecks is at the application tier level.
Yeah.
So obviously that needs to be auto-scaled and auto-balanced and things like HTTP session replications. I'm just wondering, regardless of what infrastructure it's on, what improvements would you bring to that? For an application?
Principally scalability, because they're not used in the scenario they have. It's literally machine constrained. They are physically there and so in the new scenario, if they need more, they get more.
Yeah, on demand.
Yeah, precisely.
With e-commerce, I've worked. Black Friday. You buy your best spec metal for 1 day of the year, 2 days of the year. The rest of the time it's running at 10%. One day it might go up to 70%. But you're wasting a lot of money because of...
Exactly. And so the real transformation here was more to do with version levels to facilitate a modern approach. Because prior to doing that, it was just a problem, pure and simple. Okay, so we're getting to the final 5 minutes now, guys. So this one is an interesting one. So we have got a number of quite high-profile restaurant chains, some of them global, well, one of them global, the others national. And they were obviously hurt very badly during the COVID period, and some of them emerged literally as totally different businesses than they went in. So they went in as single franchise, dine-in, for example, and they've come out as hybrid delivery, dine-in, a fifth of the size, but multi-franchise. So literally every feature that they had going into the COVID pandemic has been flipped, essentially. And in that scenario, we needed to act to really help them to transition, because they went from a very large traditional scenario into one where they actually had multiple POS systems, some of them vendor mandated, others choice, mostly SaaS, but obviously they still have their legacy environment as well. And again, what we did there was we took them off of an IBM Oracle piece of metal that was costing them a lot of money. It made a lot of sense when they were a different shape, but in the new shape it didn't make sense. Moved them to the OLVM cloud environment and gave them the integrations required so that the APIs that they were running with the SaaS systems were able to feed not only into the existing core system, which ultimately I think they want to sunset, but also into their BI development, which is the new decision support thing. So all of these use cases kind of go back to that original diagram that basically says wherever it is you're going, you wouldn't necessarily start from here unless you had a lot of help. And that is really what we're there to do, is to provide that help. We've only got a few more minutes, but are there any other questions? Have you found this interesting? Is it something that you've been contemplating or thinking about dealing with?
So I guess in terms of migrating is one part of it, but in terms of doing that initial onboarding configuration,
yep.
Is that a consulting exercise?
Yeah, I mean, it's a two-phase approach. So the first phase is to look at what's there and decide how it should be, and to actually do that migration essentially.
And I guess you can do a piecemeal migration. If you've got a componentized system, then you don't have to do an all or nothing lift and shift. You can do
exactly.
This section over and make that microservices, and then.
Yeah, I mean, some of them are so ancient that the microservices aren't an option until you've done. But yeah, ideally that's what you end up with, something where you can take it, turn it into an orchestrated, componentized scenario, and go from there. But essentially, once that migration has been done, then the support service is a comprehensive one. So yeah, from a features point of view, we do 24/7, 15-minute, full resolving, full stack service, and it's actually usually costs about the same as 1 or 2 full-time equivalents, so it's pretty good value in terms of OpEx. So yeah, and it's fire and forget. We don't care if it's the latest stuff, we cover them all. Hey, look, there's a little diagram here. So if you want to do NoSQL, MongoDB or whatever, Elastic deployment, that's fine by us. But if you've also got Oracle 8, we can work with you. So there you go. I think that's it.
Thanks.
There you go. Thanks, guys.